Hello, I'm Margaret. The dimly lit hallway of St. Augustine's nursing home carried the familiar scent of antiseptic and aged wood, mingling with the gentle hum of medical equipment. It was another quiet evening shift for me, but I had long since stopped calling them quiet. The stories hidden within these walls, the pain in the eyes of those long forgotten by the world, nothing here was ever truly silent. As I passed room 214, I paused briefly before stepping inside. The air was thick with the fading scent of lavender, laced with something deeper, something sorrowful. Mrs. Harlow lay on her narrow bed, her silver hair spread across the pillow like threads woven into a tapestry of regret. Her breathing was steady but weak, the kind that spoke of years weighed down by pain, of memories too heavy to bear yet impossible to release. I had grown fond of her in a way I never expected. Unlike the other residents, Mrs. Harlow lived in the past, barely holding on to the present, clinging instead to whatever remained of her clarity. She spoke of ghosts, but not the ones lurking in dark corners, hers whispered from within, haunting the depths of her mind. And somehow, I had become her confessor, albeit unwillingly. Tonight was no different. As I gently smoothed down her blankets, a faint murmur escaped her lips, a name, spoken so softly that it almost vanished before reaching my ears. Jack. I froze. I had heard that name before. Many times. In murmured regrets, in whispers of sorrow. But there was something different about the way she spoke it tonight. Something unsettling. I sat at the edge of the bed, watching as her frail fingers twitched, reaching for something, or someone, long gone. You always say that name in your sleep, I said gently. Who is Jack? Mrs. Harlow's lips parted slightly, her faded eyes fluttering beneath her heavy lids. For a moment, I thought she wouldn't answer. But then, in a voice as fragile as she was, she spoke. My son. A sharp breath caught in my throat. I had suspected it, of course, the way she clung to that name, as though it were both a prayer and an unhealed wound. But hearing her confirm it tightened something in my chest. Where is he now? I asked, careful to keep my voice steady. Mrs. Harlow exhaled a slow, shaky breath. Gone. Lost in the shadows. My brows furrowed, but before I could press further, her frail hand reached out, grasping mine with surprising strength. I failed him, she whispered. I failed my son. A chill ran down my spine. Her words were soaked in regret, something deeper, something darker. But before I could ask anything more, her grip loosened, and her body drifted back into sleep. I sat there for a long time, my fingers still tingling from her touch. I had heard confessions before, stories of past sins, of regrets that clung to the soul like shadows. But this felt different. This felt like the beginning of something. Something I wasn't sure I was ready to uncover. I had spent years tending to people like Eleanor Harlow, fragile souls caught between the present and the ghosts of their past. But there was something different about her. Something that made my stomach tighten every time she spoke of him. Jack. She never said his name outright, not when she was awake. But when she drifted off, tangled in the wires that kept her tethered to life, she whispered it like a prayer. Or maybe a curse. Tonight was no different. I sat beside her bed, the dim glow of the hallway light barely cutting through the room's stillness. Eleanor's breath was uneven, rattling in her chest, her face pale against the pillow. The machines hummed steadily, oblivious to the storm brewing behind her closed eyelids. And then, like a thread unraveling, she murmured. Jack, my boy. Jack. A chill spread through me. It wasn't just the way she said it, but the weight behind it, the longing, the sorrow. I leaned in slightly, my pulse quickening. She was dreaming, trapped in a memory I would never fully see. But I could feel it pressing against the air between us. A part of me wanted to wake her, to ask the questions that had been gnawing at me since I first heard that name. Instead, I stayed still, listening, waiting. And then her lips parted once more, voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, Jack. I didn't mean to." The words cut off abruptly as her body tensed, fingers twitching against the sheets. My own breath hitched. I had seen regret before, lived among the confessions of the dying. But this was different. This was raw, bleeding, unfinished. I should have looked away, should have let her rest. Instead, I found myself gripping the arm of the chair, heart pounding with a realization I didn't want to acknowledge. Whoever Jack was, whatever she had done to him, it still haunted her. And now, it was haunting me too. April 3rd, 2023. I've worked in this nursing home for 7 years, but I've never met a woman quite like Eleanor Harlow. She wasn't like the other residents, those who spent their days staring at the ceiling, waiting for something, anything, to break the dull monotony of time. No, Eleanor still had a fire in her, even as sickness weighed her body down. It was in her eyes, a sharpness, a knowing look that made me feel like she saw right through me. Every Monday and Thursday, she was confined to her bed, hooked up to the machines that kept her frail body stable. And every time I sat by her side, feeding her soup or adjusting her blankets, she would talk. Not about the weather or how bland the food was, but about the past, her past. And slowly, piece by piece, I began to see the picture of a woman who had lived a life full of regret. "I wasn't a good mother," she whispered one evening, her voice barely louder than the hum of the medical equipment. "He deserved better than me." I knew who she was talking about before she even said his name. Jack. I'd heard that name before, slipping past her lips in the middle of the night, tangled in fevered dreams. I never asked about him outright. Something about the way she spoke of him, like a ghost still haunting her, told me that Jack Harlow was not just a name from her past. He was her greatest wound. I should have just listened and nodded like I always did, but that night, I made a mistake. A mistake that changed everything. I let something slip. A sharp breath caught in Eleanor's throat, and her weary eyes fixed on mine with sudden intensity. You know something." I froze. My mind raced, trying to find a way out of the mess I had just created. Eleanor's voice trembled, but it wasn't weak, it was demanding. "Tell me." I swallowed hard. Because what could I say? That I had seen a shadow lurking in the hallway weeks ago? That for just a second, in the dim glow of the emergency exit sign, I had locked eyes with a man who should not exist? That I had seen Jack Harlow, alive? I found myself pausing by Eleanor's door longer than I should have. The sound of her weak breaths, the occasional whisper of a name, Jack, it sent a strange shiver through me. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks, that I'd been thinking too much about the mysterious man in the shadows. But deep down, I knew better. I stepped inside quietly, carrying a tray with her evening medication. The dim light cast soft shadows across her frail form. Her hands trembled slightly as I helped her sit up. "You're always so kind, Margaret," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Not many take the time to listen. I smiled, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Everyone deserves to be heard, Eleanor." Her lips quivered, forming a ghost of a smile. "Then, will you listen to an old woman's regrets?" I hesitated for a second. This wasn't the first time she had hinted at something deeper, something painful. But tonight, there was something different in her eyes. A sadness that clung to her like an old, worn-out coat. "Of course," I said, sitting beside her. She took a shaky breath. "I had a son once, my Jack." There it was again. That name. He is different," she continued, her fingers gripping the bedsheet. "I tried. I really tried, but I failed him. I failed as a mother. Her voice cracked on the last word, and for a moment, she wasn't just a frail old woman in a care home, she was a mother drowning in guilt. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "What happened, Eleanor?" She looked at me, eyes wet and searching. "I don't know where he is, but I know I lost him. And it's my fault." A chill crept up my spine. I thought of the man I'd seen lurking in the dark. The way his eyes had burned into me, the silent threat hanging between us. Eleanor shifted, her breathing growing shallow. "Margaret, do you think people like me deserve forgiveness?" I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could, she exhaled a shaky breath and closed her eyes. I stayed there, watching over her as the weight of her words settled deep into my bones. Outside, beyond the window, the night stretched endlessly. And somewhere in the dark, I knew he was watching. I balanced the tray carefully in my hand as I walked down the dimly lit hallway. The air was thick with the sterile scent of antiseptic, blending with the low hum of medical machines from nearby rooms. It was late. Most of the patients had already settled into their nightly routines, some asleep, others staring blankly at the ceiling, lost in worlds only they could see. As I passed Eleanor Harlow's room, a soft whisper drifted into the hallway. I slowed my pace. Eleanor often talked in her sleep, her words fragmented remnants of a past she could no longer hold on to. Tonight was no different. Jack. The name barely reached my ears before fading into a quiet sigh. I hesitated for a moment, then shook my head. I had grown used to this, these murmurs, these ghostly echoes of a life long gone. I shifted the tray in my hand and continued forward. Then, a soft creak broke the silence. A door. Opening. Slowly. I froze. My pulse quickened as I turned my head slightly, searching for the sound. It had come from behind me. From Eleanor's room. But, her door was closed when I passed it. Wasn't it? A shiver crawled up my spine. Carefully, I stepped back, peering into the hallway. The overhead light flickered, stretching long, shifting shadows across the walls. The corridor was empty. Still, that tingling sensation lingered at the back of my neck, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. I swallowed, pulling in a slow, steady breath. My rational mind whispered reassurances. Buildings creaked. Doors shifted. The wind played tricks. But my gut was screaming otherwise. And then, movement. At the very edge of the flickering light, near the far end of the hallway, a shadow slipped through the darkness. Fast. So fast I could have imagined it. But I hadn't. I knew I hadn't. My grip on the tray tightened, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. "Hello?" The word barely left my lips. Silence. I took a step forward, my breath shallow, uneven. I leaned slightly, peering down the corridor, but there was nothing there. The hallway stood empty before me, still and silent. But someone had been there. Jack had been there. My hands trembled as I exhaled slowly, unease settling deep in my bones. Whatever had just happened, it wasn't over. And Eleanor's whisper still clung to the air, a lingering ghost that refused to be forgotten.
Jack may be here, maybe right next to you.